Welcome back to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to be jumping into a really fascinating book, and this one's a bit darker, a bit more intense than some of the other stuff we've looked at.
Yeah.
And this was a suggestion from one of you, so thank you so much for that. It is Perfume: The Story of a Murderer by Patrick Süskind.
Ooh, excellent choice. Süskind, he really takes you there. I mean, you feel like you're right there with Grenouille. You can practically smell the streets of 18th century Paris.
Yeah, and it's not just a simple thriller, right?
Right.
There are some really deep themes running through the whole thing: obsession, the power of scent, identity, even the nature of beauty and desire.
It really makes you think about how much our sense of smell shapes our reality. We often take it for granted, but it's so tied to memory and emotion.
Yeah.
And Grenouille, the protagonist, he experiences the world almost entirely through smell.
Yeah. So, speaking of Grenouille, let's get into it, shall we? The story starts in a pretty grim place, wouldn't you say? The Cimetière des Innocents in Paris.
Oh, absolutely. Susskind doesn't hold back on the details, does he? It's July 17th, 1738, an incredibly hot day. And this cemetery, well, it was basically just a giant pit of rotting corpses. I mean, they'd been burying people there for centuries.
Yeah, the book describes it as just this overwhelming stench of death and decay.
Hmm.
And right there, amidst all that, our protagonist, Jean-Baptiste Grenouille, is born.
And his birth is just as awful as the setting. I mean, his mother's at her fish stall, and this is her fifth child. All the others died, stillbirths, or they just didn't make it. And she's just completely, totally desperate.
Yeah, you get this real sense of the poverty and the brutal reality of life back then. I mean, her only hope is to maybe live a few more years, find a husband, and have real children. It's pretty heartbreaking.
And so, right there, under the gutting table, covered in fish guts and blood, Grenouille is born. It's almost like he's marked from the very beginning, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty symbolic, isn't
Yeah.
it? Like born into this world of death and decay,
Hmm.
and things don't get much better for him, do they?
No, not really. I mean, the police officer, LaFosse, he just wants to get rid of the baby as quickly as possible. He thinks about sending him to a foundling home, but then changes his mind because it's too much trouble.
And I'm guessing those foundling homes weren't exactly, five-star hotels.
Oh, absolutely not. They were notorious for their high mortality rates. Overcrowding, disease, neglect. It was really a matter of luck whether an infant survived or not.
So LaFosse decides to take Grenouille to the cloister of Saint-Marie. It's like, okay, at least he'll be baptized. Maybe that'll improve his chances.
Right. And there, he's given the name Jean-Baptiste. It's almost ironic, isn't it? Like this name that represents purity and rebirth, giving to a child born in such filth and despair.
Yeah, big contrast. But at least he's spared from being shipped off to the big orphanage in Rouen, right? For now, anyway. He's placed with a wet nurse, Jean Baptiste.
And this is where things start to get really strange when you say, a few weeks later, Jean-Baptiste goes back to the cloister. She's absolutely frantic.
What's wrong? What happened?
She claims the baby has no smell, absolutely no scent whatsoever. She says it's unnatural, even devilish. Can you imagine taking care of a baby that doesn't smell like a baby?
That would be unsettling. I mean,
Right.
it's such a primal thing, isn't it? The way babies smell.
Exactly. And Father Terrier, the monk at the cloister, he tries to rationalize it, explain it away. He sniffs the baby himself, expecting to find some sort of odor.
Did he?
Nope, nothing. He smells his own lunch, but the baby, absolutely odorless. It's this moment of complete bewilderment for him.
I bet. I mean, how do you reconcile that with your understanding of the world,
Yeah.
especially as a man of faith?
Right. He thinks maybe babies just don't smell, but the wet nurse is insistent. She's cared for plenty of babies, and they all had that distinct baby scent, a good smell, she calls it. And then she describes how sick babies smell different. Pox smells like manure, scarlet fever like old apples, and consumption like onions.
Wow, that's pretty specific. I never thought about it like that.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how closely linked our sense of smell is to our perception of health and disease? And Terrier, he's really struggling with this. He's a man of reason, and he had superstition.
So what does he do?
Well, he tries to convince the wet nurse that she's imagining things, that it's just a silly superstition, like witches and fortune-telling.
But he can't smell the baby either.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's stuck. He offers her more money, but she refuses. She's terrified of this odorless child. So in the end, he decides to send Grenouille to Madame Gaillard.
And Madame Gaillard, she's a bit of a character, isn't she?
Oh, she is. She runs this boarding house, but she lost her sense of smell when she was a child.
Really? How did that happen?
She was hit in the head with a poker. Brutal.
Ouch. So I'm guessing she wasn't exactly the warm, nurturing type.
No, not at all. She was completely indifferent to the children in her care. But, to be fair, her establishment was less deadly than most orphanages at the time.
Wow, that's a low bar. But I guess it was a different time. So Grenouille ends up with this woman who can't smell, and he himself has no scent. It's almost like the two sides of the same coin, isn't it?
Yeah, there's this weird symmetry there. And amazingly, Grenouille survives his time with her. I mean, he gets measles, dysentery, chickenpox, cholera. He even falls into a well and gets scalded with boiling water.
Wow, this kid is tough.
Right. Süskind describes him as being as resilient as a bacterium. But while he's physically surviving, something else is developing within him, his sense of smell.
Here we go. This is where it gets interesting.
It is. Even as a young child, he can identify and remember thousands upon thousands of different scents. He knows every person, every place, every object by its unique smell.
It's like he's building this massive olfactory library in his mind.
Exactly. And he can even combine these scents in his imagination, creating entirely new fragrances. It's like he's composing music with smells.
That's a fascinating concept. Like, what would that even sound like?
Who knows? But for Grenouille, it's his reality. And it's all happening while his other abilities are developing much slower. He doesn't walk until he's 3. He doesn't speak his first word until he's 4.
And what was his first word?
Fishes. It was like an echo of a distant fishmonger. And then his next word was pelargonium.
So very much focused on smells, even in his language development.
Absolutely. And when he does learn to speak, he struggles with words for things that don't have a strong smell, like the word wood. The smell of it was so overwhelming for him that he could barely say the word. It's as if his sense of smell was so acute, so dominant, that it interfered with his ability to use language.
It makes you wonder how differently he perceives the world compared to everyone else.
Right. And Madame Gaillard, even though she can't smell, she starts to get really uneasy around Grenouille. She senses that there's something strange about him. She even thinks he might have some kind of second sight.
Like he can see things that others can't.
Yeah, like he can see through walls or something. It creeps her out. And when the cloister stops paying for his care, she decides to get rid of him.
So what does she do?
She sells him to a tanner named Grimmel.
A tanner. That sounds like a pretty rough job, especially back then.
Oh, it was brutal. Tanning involved all sorts of toxic chemicals and backbreaking labor. But Madame Gaillard, she doesn't care. She just wants him gone. And in a twist of fate, her life takes a turn for the worse after she sells Grenouille.
Really? What happened?
She loses all her money and ends up dying penniless in a mass grave. It's almost like there was some kind of karmic retribution, wouldn't you say?
It's hard to say, but it's definitely a striking detail. So Grenouille finds himself in this tannery, surrounded by the stench of animal hides and chemicals. I can't imagine that was a pleasant experience, even for someone with his heightened sense of smell.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But Grenouille, he thrives in this environment. He actually enjoys the constant barrage of new smells. He spends hours just sniffing the air, absorbing every nuance of the tannery's aromas.
It's like he's found his element, in a way.
Yeah, in this really twisted way. But it's also tragic because he's still so isolated. Süskind points out that he could smell the sea breeze coming from the Seine, but he'd never actually seen the sea. He's trapped in this world of smells, but he's also limited by it.
He's mapping the city through scent, but he can't experience it fully. It's like he's got all the pieces of a puzzle, but he can't put them together.
That's a great way to put it. And then, one day, everything changes for him. It's September 1st, 1753, the anniversary of the king's coronation. There's a huge fireworks display at the Pont Royal, and Grenouille is there not to watch the fireworks, but to experience the smells of the crowd.
I bet there were some interesting smells in that crowd.
Oh, I'm sure. But for Grenouille, it's all just background noise. Until, that is, he catches a whiff of something extraordinary. It's coming from a young girl selling plums.
Okay, so what's so special about this girl's scent?
It's hard to describe. Süskind uses all these negations to convey its uniqueness. He says it's fresh, but not like citrus or mint. It's warm, but not like spice or wood. It's like nothing he's ever smelled before.
So it's not just that it's pleasant, it's like it's something entirely new.
Exactly, like this missing piece of the puzzle.
Right.
And for Grenouille, it's an absolute revelation. He becomes obsessed with capturing this scent. It's all he can think about.
So what does he do?
He follows her, he stalks her through the streets of Paris, and in a moment of chilling detachment, he murders her.
He murders her just to get her scent.
Yes. It's important to understand that this is not a crime of passion or lust. Grenouille, he doesn't even look at the girl while he's killing her.
Yeah.
He's solely focused on preserving her scent.
Wow, that's really disturbing.
It is, and it marks a turning point in the novel. It's the moment when Grenouille's obsession with scent transforms into something truly dark and monstrous.
So what happens next?
Well, Grenouille spends the next week meticulously cataloging and organizing all the scents he's ever encountered. He's building a system, a hierarchy of smells, and this horrific act, the murder of the plum girl, it becomes the catalyst for his life's work. He's determined to become the greatest perfumer the world has ever known.
And we've only just scratched the surface of his journey.
Oh yeah, we've just begun. Next time, we'll follow Grenouille as he apprentices with a master perfumer, Giuseppe Baldini, and we'll see how his obsession leads him down an increasingly dark and dangerous path.
So until then, I want you to think about this. What is the scent that you would be most desperate to capture and preserve? And what lengths would you go to possess such an ephemeral essence? Think about how our sense of smell shapes our memories, our desires, our very understanding of the world. And how, for Grenouille, that sense led him down a truly singular and terrifying path. We'll be back soon with more on Perfume, the story of a murderer. A novel that forces us to confront some unsettling truths about ourselves and the power of our senses.